Thank you for listening to Yoked. My name is Kelly Sunrose, and I am a practicing and teaching yogini. This podcast is a collection of practices, interviews, Q&A sessions, and mini workshops all about living the practice of yoga. My main teaching home is the Wildcat Yoga Club, an online community for practice, study, and connection. New members are always welcome, and there is a link to the site in the show notes. I offer this podcast for free since 2008 to support the ongoing creation and production of my work. You can make a one-time or ongoing donation via PayPal. There's a link in the show notes. To learn more about my practice and my offerings, please visit sunroseyoga.com. Thank you for being here. Hello, yogis. Pranams. Deep, heartfelt bows to you. Thank you for listening to the show. I'm so happy to be here with you, and I appreciate your presence. In today's episode, I will be sharing a process for creating your own seasonal practice and care protocol that centers your values and takes all of the layers of self into consideration. Before we begin the deep dive of this episode, I'd like to share some updates since it has been a while since we've been together here. I'm still teaching 100% online until it is safe to reconvene in person, although I'm very looking forward to hopefully a day soon where we can gather and practice together. But we can still practice now together in a lot of ways. First, my practice community online, the Wildcat Yoga Club, is always accepting new members, new Wildcats. There are over 10 years worth of archived practices in the practice library, plus new practices added every single week. And in the year 2021, we have been centering various goddesses or deities, feminine archetypes to ground and center our practice. And for the month of October, we are working with Kali. So if you're interested in learning more or checking out what some of those practices are like, head on over to wildcatyogaclub.com. There's also a link in the show notes. Additionally, I have a bunch of classes on Yoga Anytime. YogaAnytime.com features, over 100 yoga teachers in all sorts of paths or margas, all sorts of styles. And I have movement, meditation, dharma, breath practices over there. And if you use the code SUNROSE, you can try it out for 30 days for free. That's yogaanytime.com. I also have a growing body of meditation and writing mini immersions that are available for immediate participation and full. They're completely available via my CourseCraft platform. And the way those work is that once you sign up, you log into the portal, and for each day of the immersion, you receive both a meditation, a guided meditation, and a guided writing prompt. And it's a really wonderful way to both support your meditation practice and your writing practice and really deepen into both of those modalities. I have a couple of different themes available, and I'm always adding more in that space. I also have full courses and practices available for immediate download that you can link to from my website, sunroseyoga.com. Finally, I have a couple of opportunities for one-on-one practice over the next couple of months. These are extremely limited, but if you're interested, definitely follow the link and we can get something scheduled. Those practices or those sessions are amazing because we can really take them in whatever direction you want to go in your practice. So those are my practice spaces these days, or my teaching spaces. I'm also curious about what you would like to study together. I'm really itching to teach another longer immersion where we center a text and some modern application of the text for 8 weeks or so. And so I'd love to hear what folks are curious about. I'd also love to hear what you'd like to have future episodes of this podcast centering. So if you have answers or thoughts on either of those, feel free to email me at sunroseyoga@gmail.com. Sorry, that was sunroseyoga@gmail.com. Or leave a comment to this episode on its show notes page. Now on to the depths of this week's episode, on to the show. You may be familiar with the seasonal podcasts I have shared in the past, and I invite you to revisit all of those, especially the ones that pertain to the current seasonal change. For Northern Hemisphere folks, we've just entered autumn, and in the Southern Hemisphere, we've just entered spring. And what I'll be sharing here today is a more general process of determining what your ideal practice and care protocols are for any given moment. So this can be repeated as often as you like and whenever you like. It feels like a potent time to get these supporting structures of our lives dialed in. And astrologically, there are a couple reasons why I'm really feeling that pull. The first is that later this week, Saturn will be stationing direct after months of being retrograde. And Saturn is our planetary archetype for support, structure, like the bones of our lives. And second, for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, we're moving into that time of year that is most associated with movement. So like I mentioned, we're moving into autumn, and this is the time of Vata, which is the Ayurvedic dosha associated with air and space. And if we think about the qualities of air and space as being light, mobile, hard to pin down sometimes, this time of year without appropriate rhythms and stabilizing practices can feel like an ungrounded or staticky time. But with some intention and practice, it can just flow. Vata is related. Vata is, in its most pure and rarefied form, is prana, our life force. And so if you think about like when you have everything dialed in, and prana is just flowing, that's where there's movement, but it is stable and creative and as grounded as it can be. So let's put all of these alignments and aspects to good use in service of our values. To begin with, as some of you know, like for me, it is ideal to begin with an invocation. And because this is a practice that centers nourishment, both of the self at every layer, but the self that is our movement through the world and our engagement with our community, we will be chanting the Mahamrityunjaya, which is long associated with restoration, healing, and nourishment. Now, this is an old mantra memorialized in the Rig Veda, and it is a song, or it is addressed to Rudra, a fierce deity of wind, which is one of these strong forces in fall, like Vata. I always think of like the blustering wind just blowing my hair around. And so the text of the mantra begins with an acknowledgement to Rudra, who is a prototype of Shiva. If you've read any of the Rig Veda, you'll know that there are many references to gods, devas, and to deities that maintain some essence through the later texts, but whose names change or other features seem to change. And later on, Rudra is associated with Shiva. And Shiva is the one or the aspect of self that destroys our illusions, really, like the destruction that is required for what is next to begin. So very generative destruction, that, like, I know that's a paradox or an oxymoron, but like that is the work of Shiva. And then the text goes on, so making an offering of something sacred to Rudra, he who is fragrant and who nourishes all. Like the cucumber who is liberated from the stem, may I be liberated from my fear of death, not from my essential nature. And so if you think about, like, in my garden, we grew so many cucumbers this year, and like the perfect ripeness of the cucumber, like you don't even really need to pull it away from the stem. Like if you just bring your hands to the cucumber, it will come off without any force when it is in full and perfect ripeness. And the fear of death and the deathlessness or essential nature that is referenced in this mantra, some of you may recognize from another very old chant that we have sung together, Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Sadgamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om, that may I be led from fear of death into an awareness of that which does not die, which is also another Rig Veda chant that is widely practiced. And so just this, the nourishment of moving out of fear is what endures here. So the text, as always, don't worry. We're all learning. We're all practicing. It is through practice that we learn. And so we'll chant this 4 times together. You might use your thumb on your index, middle, ring finger, if those are available to you, or any other method of counting. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Pandanan Mrityor Mukshya Mamritat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Pandanam Rityor Mukshya Mamritat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Pandanan Mrityor Mukshya Mamritat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Pandanan Mrityor Mukshya Mamritat. Om. And with the essence of the mantra still flowing, spend some moments noticing how and what you feel. Sensations in your body, emotional undercurrents or overtones, quality of mind. Just noticing and then letting the impression or the notation go, just like sand slipping through your fingers. And in a sense, this process mimics the one that we'll be engaging with here as we create a practice and care protocol. We're engaging with an intentional practice and then noticing what happens without judgment. And truly that is, like in a nutshell, what we are up to in all of these practices. And hopefully that will give us an imprint or a pattern of moving through all life with similar intention and awareness. So before we jump into the nuts and bolts of creating the protocol, I think it's really helpful to adopt a helpful mindset. And what I would encourage is curiosity and reverence. We together are in a practice of intentional learning how best to support ourselves. No part of this practice is intended to punish or judge, though we will use our ever finely tuning discernment to make adjustments to our strategies. So you might also actively affirm this mindset And when we affirm a mindset, we cast a spell over ourselves and begin the process of living into the future we want to create. So the mindset, the way I phrase this for myself is, I am creating this protocol to learn more about myself and to support myself in order to live my values. As with everything we'll be discussing here, use what works, and if there are subtle or significant shifts that you need to make in order for this to resonate, please do that. And as always, if it's not the practice for you in this moment, I invite you to just let it be, to set it down and return to it later or not at all. The map or the model I use when creating my own protocols is the koshas. And this is a way of describing the human experience in layers of self. And this dates all the way back to the Upanishads. And it's a way of sort of segmenting parts of ourselves, which, anytime we create a map or a model, we're separating things that are not separate, but we're doing that for the purpose of getting a really detailed view and I have a mental picture of a magnifying glass and examining everything on the forest floor, where we're seeing more than just the sum of the forest floor. We're noticing the pine needles and the bits of lichen and the bits of moss and dirt, and maybe there's some bear poop over there or some seeds. And even though as a whole we're in the forest ecology and we're talking about a unified forest floor, we're really digging in to the specifics of that. And that's sort of how I think about the maps or the models, and particularly the koshas, as being a way of focusing our awareness so that we're more able to appreciate all of the parts that make a whole. That being said, the koshas are just one map. And so if there is another way that you sort of organize yourself, perhaps if we have studied the subtle body anatomy of the chakras together and that really calls to you, or if there's some other system that really works for sort of understanding yourself, then by all means use that. Furthermore, the approach that I use centers questions rather than checklists or a pre-formulated framework. Since although there are many aspects of our experience on Earth as human beings that are shared and universal, many of the specifics differ in ways that matter most at the granular, day-to-day, choice-by-choice level. And so for that reason, I won't be saying you should do this, but rather following the questions that lead you to answers or adaptations or possibilities that resonate with your life and yourself. Additionally, I've mentioned a couple of times how values or heart codes play into this work. And this is really the underlying vision or mission or big why that motivates us as we move through the world. Like, what are the things that are the most important to me in this human life? And we're not going to go into it terribly extensively in this podcast, but if you would like to pause and just sort of refresh your own memory as to what your values are specifically, I have an earlier podcast all about this called Heart Codes. And I'll link to that in the show notes. I actually have a couple episodes on heart codes. And I think that's a really great way to sort of ground in values that exist beyond cultural structures that may or may not be supporting us. So there are certain assumptions that we may be walking through the world with that are heavily influenced or patterned by the environment or the culture we're living in, and taking some time to really get quiet, get spacious, and ask yourself, what matters to you truly? That can help just move the choices that we're making in our day-to-day life in a really powerful direction. And finally, just sort of in this pre-beginning approach and method discussion, I always think it's super helpful to begin by locating yourself in the present, asking the question, where am I now? And then looking back and looking forward, looking back and seeing how things are the same or different than a season or a year or a decade ago. And then inviting yourself to look into the future and begin the process of living in to that future vision. So I mentioned that we're organizing ourselves around the koshas, these layers of self. And I think it's helpful to first orient ourselves as to what those koshas are. And the way they're described here, or the way I will describe them here, moves from most substantial or tangible or weighty, in the sense of having mass and having a physical structure, to the most subtle or the most etheric. And I think, as I mentioned in the introduction, it's important to remember that the separations that we're drawing here are arbitrary, and they're there for the purpose of giving us some direction and clarity, and the categories serve us. We're not attempting to fit the aspects of ourselves that may be multi-kosha. We're not attempting to just sort of shoehorn them into one. So beginning then in the most substantial, we have the Anamaya Kosha. And this is the food body, roughly. Kosha means sheath or covering. And Maya in this case means made of. And so as we go through the koshas, you'll hear some repeated words and syllables. And so there is the kosha or the sheath or the layer, and then what that sheath is made of. And so first we have the Anamaya Kosha, the body that is made of food. That is what you put on and in your physical body with which to nourish it. And, this is probably the most obvious place to really get a sense of how we can support ourselves. What and when are we consuming foods and drinks and, the products that we put on our body, our physical body. And the second body is the Anamaya Kosha. Prana is perhaps a word you're familiar with. This is our life force. And this is the body that is made of our life force or our vitality. It's sort of how you nourish that sense of aliveness that perhaps, comes through, like you feel it through your physical body, but it is more essential or more subtle than that. And here these practices could include, the movement, not just asana, but all movement that you engage with to give the body that sense of aliveness. Maybe it's a practice like taking a cold shower or alternating cold and warm. That can contribute to your sense of vitality. Obviously, pranamaya sounds very much like pranayama, the restraint of our prana, generally entered into through breathing practices or breath work. And so they're very much, pranayama could be part of how you nourish your Anamaya Kosha. The third body is Monomyakosha. And mano is measuring, your measuring mind. I call this the mind sense body, which is what and how you are nourishing your information processing mind, like the aspect of mind that is processing what you take in through your senses and the thoughts that are a result of interacting with the world around you. Anamaya Kosha is the wisdom body. And when we engage in a study or an inquiry around Anamaya Kosha, we might ask how we are nourishing the ways we integrate wisdom, the ways we take information or knowledge or experience and we embody them. That feeling that goes beyond mind when we have, it's more than just memorizing words on a flashcard for a test. It's like fully appreciating and committing to yourself some new learning, some new wisdom. And the final kosha is the Anandamaya Kosha. Ananda is the bliss that has no opposite. So it's the bliss that includes all aspects of being. And to engage with this kosha, we might ask, how am I nourishing that essential nature? How am I nourishing my spirit? So that's our map for how we might construct a protocol. We'll go through and ask how we've been serving each of these bodies, and then ask how or what needs to change, or how do you want to be serving or caring for those aspects of yourself. And so now that we have this sort of map, it's important, I think, to just locate ourselves in this moment and to ask, how are you currently nourishing all parts of yourself? And so to take a moment, I suggest pressing pause on this recording and going through. Particularly helpful is to use the workbook that I created for this episode and to ask, what am I putting on and in my body? How am I nourishing my sense of vitality? How am I taking care of my mind? What am I feeding my mind? What podcasts, what books, what television programs or movies or conversations? And how am I nourishing the part of myself that integrates wisdom? Like, is there space in your life to integrate? Are there people in your life who inspire you in the direction you want to go? How are you nourishing your bliss body, your essential nature, your spirit? So taking a moment and asking, like, what is happening now? How am I nourishing all of these parts? And then once you have done that, coming back and asking where you feel depleted or where you feel as though you could be, more care is required or more care would be ideal. Like, for example, if you have been very tired or suffering from insomnia, like looking at how you can support yourself in getting more quality sleep through the lens of the koshas. And then the flip side of that is like to honor and notice where you feel like things are humming. Where do you feel content in those systems? Or like, for now, things are working well. And when you have a place like that, I always feel like it's a great plan to get a little more granular and ask, like, what about my approach here is working? Why does it feel like, your meditation practice is in a really good groove? What's contributing to that? And then finally, in our sort of location, our self-location in the present, you might ask, what are the circumstances of your life like right now? And these are things that you may or may not have control over. For example, we're still, as I'm recording this, living through a global pandemic that has affected the ways in which we're moving through the world, the ways in which we're relating to each other, the ways that we're working. And so just noting all of those things, writing them down and looking as, taking as tiny and as broad of a view as you can, to like fully contextualize you in this moment, in this life. And so at every moment, I know I will repeat this, I think it's a really good idea to just like press pause and spend some time reflecting on, where am I now? Where are we now? And then once you have located yourself in the present fully, take some time to learn from the past. And thinking specifically about the past season, what particular challenges were you working with? For example, we've just come through summer, and just for some of my practices, one of the scheduling challenges I work with is having both of my kids home with me all the time, all summer, which is wonderful. I'm not complaining about that at all. But it makes the task of calendaring and scheduling more important because I like to get a lot of my protocols done before my kids wake up. And so after you've gone through your challenges, you might ask what strategies or protocols or practices worked well. For example, oh, I met up with my friend once a month to go for a walk. And that was a great way for me both to catch up with my friend and to get some sun and to get some exercise, which nourished my vitality, and to be in nature. So, just again, I think anytime you can identify a win or a boon, it's important. And again, if you can identify or pinpoint or name what specifically about that strategy worked well, that can be super helpful. And also it can bolster the effect of the thing if we're aware of it. Like just now I was talking about taking a walk with my friend. I hadn't even thought about how nice it is just to get some sun while exercising, while connecting. And also looking at Mount Hood while we walk. And that can be another little boost, just acknowledging the thing is a boost. And then the flip side, what strategies worked less well and why? I'm trying to think of what. So if I don't wake up early in the summer, there are certain things that just don't happen. And so making sure I get a good night's sleep is vital. And I struggle with sleep in the summer because of how light it is. And so that's one thing, I'm constantly titrating all of that and pinpointing every little bit of what needs work, darker curtains. I could go on, but you get the idea. And based on how you spent your time in the last season, what values did your protocols support or advance? And are those the values you want to be lifting up? So for me, I struggle, as I know many people do, with the deep patterning of this need to be productive and the need to be working. And so frequently I will find that I'm prioritizing more mental activity, things that are in front of the computer, things that are related to work over the physical movement that I know makes me feel great and makes me sleep better. Just silliness with my kids that I know is good for all of us and that I love doing. And so, it's really good and also hard to be honest about okay, within the constraints of my life, understanding everyone has to pay bills and the garbage has to be taken out. When I am in my free time and how I am moving through all of my work are my values right there with me. So as always, I'm going to remind you to press pause whenever you need to. And then finally, getting into future vision, just to ask, what are the values you want to center in your life for this season or moving forward or in this moment? And as I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of resources that center this question and that really get to the heart of this. So if you need some support there, click on those links. And then what is one practice you can engage with this upcoming season to support each layer of yourself? For example, I realized this summer that I just wasn't drinking enough water. It's not like I was drinking a lot of coffee or a lot of alcohol. I'm actually not drinking either of those things, but I just wasn't drinking enough water throughout the day. And that for me has been a practice where I'm like, okay, water drinking is a priority. Anamaya Kosha. Be intentional. How can I support myself in drinking more water? And so going through and doing that for each layer of self. And, perhaps more than one thing will come to you. That's wonderful. But just give yourself the task or the opportunity to choose one at a minimum. And then to follow up with the question, how will you support yourself in carrying out those protocols? For me, I know that if I need to pack a water bottle, whatever I'm doing, if I have a water bottle, I will be drinking water. And it's great. That's really simple. If I, if I want to meditate, I know that for me, it's a really good pattern if I do it first thing in the morning before I do anything else. And sometimes I'll meditate 2 or 3 times a day, and that's all just icing on the cake. But if I can get that first in the morning practice, I'm really good. And knowing that, just the awareness that I will do this if I do it right away in the morning. If I wait, maybe sometimes I will, but a lot of times the day gets away from me, or I just have too many obligations. I'll put an asterisk there, I can find time. But anyway, just that awareness of if I do it at this time, I know it will be done. And then I find whenever I'm engaging in this kind of practice, to gather all the materials together, to write all of this together, and then to affirm with an I am statement, I am living my values, I am caring for myself, I am a priority, I am. And that is really powerful. So gathering the things, writing it down, repeating it, and, sealing it with a kiss, if that works for you. So this is a protocol. This is a process for creating your own protocol. And I would love to hear how this tool works for you, and also how you work with it to make it your own. Along those lines, if you would like support in habit creation, in really figuring out what your core kosha practices are, then be in touch. Email me and we can potentially get a one-on-one session scheduled, or I'm taking names of folks who are interested in a habits workshop that I have taught many times in the past, but that has been on hiatus through the pandemic, and that I would love to bring to this community in a virtual format. So my email is sunroseyoga@gmail.com. If you'd like to join my practice community, head on over to wildcatyogaclub.com. And as always, if you would like to support the show by making a one-time donation, I would love that. There's a link to my PayPal in the show notes. And a really great way to support this show for free is to share it with a friend and to rate and review this show in Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. take the very best care. Peace.